Hey class, this week we are going to cover Module 4, and we're going to talk about Wonder Woman, the first superheroine, which he isn't really. Kind of like Superman was not the first superhero, but he was like the first superhero that really mattered. So, same thing here, okay? So she wasn't the first female superhero, but she was the most famous, and still is. So she first appeared in All-Star Comics number 8, which was another spin-off of Detective Comics, i.e. DC. And this was in December 1941, so around the same time as Captain America. Created by William Moulton Marston and his wife Elizabeth, and first drawn by Harry Peter. And Marston was a very interesting character himself. He was a college professor. He considered himself to be one of the first feminists, first male feminists, and he included symbols of women's suffrage, i.e. the right to vote, in a lot of the Wonder Woman comics, chains primarily, and later on it got a little kinkier and became more bondagey, but it started very firmly as like her lasso of truth. That's part of that too, the bondage that women are trying to break. He also invented the lie detector, which is kind of where the idea of the lasso of truth came from as well. Who knows? It might have, the lasso of truth may have been what helped him come up with the lie detector test. We never know. He also shared another woman with his wife. They all lived together. And it wasn't like a sister-wife situation where he had two wives. He and his wife had another woman that they both loved, and they shared each other's children, all that kind of stuff. So it was a very forward-looking, polyamorous relationship well before that sort of thing was really in vogue. Okay, so although Wonder Woman was born much earlier and she was tied to Greek mythology, definitely into some of the whole gods and demi-gods that we talked about earlier in the class, her origins are really firmly entwined with World War II. That's where her comic began, and then also her adventures really began with World War II. So she was born on the island of Themyscira. I may be pronouncing it incorrectly, but it looks good to me, which is cut off from the rest of the world and populated entirely by women. Her original adversary, Ares, the god of war, set the template for other villains and issues she tackles, which involve male power over women and generally violent and unwise male behaviors. Just the idea of fighting all the time and fighting wars, that's a man thing. Her powers are often used to subdue and de-escalate. So she's got bullet-repelling bracelets, the lasso of truth, which holds people down and makes them tell the truth, unlike her male counterparts who use force to solve every problem and often tend to escalate things. You just keep pounding something with your fists and it makes it worse and destroys entire cities, whereas Wonder Woman is always trying to contain things. She is capable of kicking ass, though. With her varying degrees of super strength. Occasionally she has the ability to fly as well when she isn't in the invisible jet. So sometimes she'd fly that, sometimes she'd just be able to fly. You never really knew when that was going to happen, depending on which comic author you were dealing with. And also immortality, because she's already been around for thousands of years. She doesn't age, and she's also pretty damn hard to kill. Okay? I mean, no one has really... Well, she probably has died in the comics a few times, just like Batman has, and Superman too. But she's pretty damn hard to kill. She also has a Clark Kent-esque alter ego named Diana Prince. So when she's not Wonder Woman, she's Diana Prince, a name she borrowed from an army nurse in the comic who emigrated to South America and didn't need her name anymore. So that's what Wonder Woman became. But it's also really close to her actual name, which is Princess Diana. So it's kind of lucky she was able to do that. Be like if Superman, instead of Clark Kent, he was Man Super. So in the 1960s, Wonder Woman lost all of her powers and became Diana Prince. That's all she was through the 1960s. And she gave her powers up because of love, as they always do. But she got her powers back in 1973 after suffering a head injury. And not long after is actually when the TV shows and TV movies were made about Wonder Woman as well. So she had like a resurgence of popularity there. Her adventures early on are tied to the American pilot Steve Trevor. who becomes simultaneously her love interest and her sidekick because he's a soldier and all that. You know, he's a pilot, and I think he worked for the CIA and also the British as well. But he's just a dude. He's just a guy. Whereas, you know, Wonder Woman she's an Amazon, and she's practically immortal, and she's, you know, got this guy that she loves, but he's also very weak at the same time. And he's the first man she ever met, and so she obviously falls in love with him because that's the way it works in comics. And he was originally killed off in 1968, right after she gives up all of her powers. Finally they get together, and then he gets killed. But he's been resurrected numerous times. And we'll talk about the movie a little bit later, because he gets, well, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to tell you, but he dies. But in the next Wonder Woman movie, he's in it again. So I'm assuming they're kind of going along with the comic right there. Now we've got a bonus bit here too, because, you know, as I said, she wasn't the first female superhero. There were other ones as well, and I wanted to cover some of those to go along with it. So she was one of the earliest and the most famous of them, but she's not the only one that arose during the Golden Age. So some of the ones that are a little bit less known and, of course, less appreciated in most cases. We've got Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, and she may have been the very first of the comic heroines. Originally, she was a British tabloid cartoon character, and then she showed up in Jumbo Comics #1 in 1938. She didn't have superpowers per se, but she could make animals do what you wanted them to, and she was kind of a female Tarzan, so she had a lot of jungle badassitude and could kick the asses of like entire armies of people with her army of monkeys and zebras and such. So over the years, she's been revamped and repackaged numerous times, and she was the subject of a really bad but like guilty pleasure kind of movie in the mid 80s, with, of course, the predictably racist white savior narrative, which there's no other way you could really have that with Sheena, because she's like originally kind of a British colonial type of character. So that's just, you take what you get with that kind of thing. I'm not going to say go watch the movie, but it's out there. Okay, I saw it when I was a kid. Couldn't help but see it. It was on HBO all the time. And then you have Lois Lane. She's primarily thought of as being Superman's girlfriend, but she had her own spin-off comic series. So she had Lois Lane, Girl Reporter, from the regular Superman comic from 1940 to 44 to 1946, and then also Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane from DC Showcase, and then she got a self-titled series from 1957 to 74, which is a pretty long comic run. And over the years, she's had numerous brushes with becoming a superhero. So in Action Comics #60, she gets bonked on the head and imagines that Superman grants her his powers via a blood transfusion. But of course, she wakes up at the end and she doesn't really have superpowers. But in that comic, she has a whole adventure there. And then she gets hit on the head again in a later issue, and she becomes Power Girl. And then Jimmy Olsen helps her become Elastic Lass. Once Jimmy Olsen had his own comic for a while too, and he was Elastic Lad. And then, of course, in the numerous alternate realities in the DC multiverse, which has started building up since the first Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was the first version. Then you have Final Crisis later on. Lois is Superwoman in one of those. She also becomes an evil Superwoman. She becomes an Amazon at one point, like Wonder Woman. She becomes an evil zombie, and also the Red Tornado, a weather-controlling robot. So they put her consciousness in it. And there are so many more. She also was Leopard Lady, Super Lois, and the Goddess of Integrity. So they got a lot of mileage out of Lois Lane, in case you didn't know. So she's been superheroes numerous times. And then you have Ma Hunkel, also known as the Red Tornado. First appeared in All-American Comics #3 in 1939, so another character who predated Wonder Woman. And she had a uniform consisting of red long johns, green cape, as you can see, and a saucepan helmet. So she was an unpowered, middle-aged, grocery store-owning mother of two who happens to be really good at beating up neighborhood gangsters. And she became a member of the Justice Society, which was the precursor of the Justice League. And she was in it before Wonder Woman was in it. But she had to leave due to a wardrobe malfunction. So her makeshift outfit kind of ripped, and so she had to leave, and so she missed the photo op, and no one knew she was in it. And then her initial arc ended in 1944, but then she's been revisited in the early 2000s, and Ma Hunkel, also known as the Red Tornado because of her red long johns, will show up again. Now notice also Lois Lane was the Red Tornado at some point, so comics will reuse certain names sometimes if it's a good one. And then you have Miss America, and this is the Marvel version of Miss America. There have been some other ones as well. She was originally from Marvel Mystery Comics, and then she got her own title very briefly and was a member of both the All-Winter Squad and the Liberty Legion, which was a 1970s reboot featuring mothballed Marvel characters from the 1940s. So they took some of their first characters from the Golden Age when Marvel wasn't very big, and then created the Liberty Legion. She was granted superpowers, and each issue they were a little bit different by being zapped by a lightning-struck scientific contraption. And then she later married the Wizard and died giving birth to a radioactive baby named Nuclo. So she had kind of a tragic life, but early female superhero. And then you have the Blonde Phantom. She was created by Stan Lee in 1946, one of his first creations. We'll talk a lot more about Stan Lee in Module 7. I haven't finished writing it, so don't look for it yet. Her real name is Louise Grant. She was a mild-mannered receptionist to Detective Mark Mason, who was considered the real hero, but actually the Blonde Phantom would then come out and then help him out, kick ass, really solve the cases. So she would save him all the time. Now, she has no powers, but she carries a .45 pistol that she has no logical place to hide in her incredibly tight costume. And she also suffers from Clark Kent syndrome when she's out of the costume. So when she's Louise Grant, she's clumsy and can't see anything. And, and of course, Mark Mason has no real respect for her. Okay. She had her own series until 1949. And then she was dormant until brought back in She-Hulk in the late 80s. And you can see right here in the She-Hulk, they kind of revamped her outfit a little bit. That slit in her dress got a little bit bigger. And then you have Patsy Walker, who most of you, if any of you are familiar with any of these characters, this is the one you're most likely to be familiar with. She was also known as Hellcat. And she got her start in a 1944 issue of Miss America, and she got her own comic in 1945. And then she's morphed from a teenager having teenage adventures. This was kind of the Marvel Archie Comics answer. So Archie was all about teenage stuff, and Patsy Walker was kind of like the Marvel Comics version of Archie. And notice she has red hair. And then she got turned into a much darker character, married to a half-demon. So by the time as she goes from Patsy Walker, wondering who she's going to go out with on Friday night, to Hellcat, married to a demon, it's a very different character arc right there. And then, of course, fans of Netflix's Jessica Jones and the other are tied together Netflix Marvel series will be very familiar with Patsy Walker, because that is Jessica Jones's best friend. And of course, what does she want more than anything else? She wants to be just like Jessica. Her prayers end up getting answered, but it's a very tragic arc. All right. So also some sources here. These are what I used to find this. You'll find more lost Golden Age female characters from Six Forgotten Heroes from the Marvel's Golden Age. Don Markstein's Tunipedia is really, really useful for this. I've been using that quite a bit for this class. And then 15 times Lois Lane has gained superpowers. And then Comic Vine also had a really good entry on Ma Hunkel. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is our notes for Wonder Woman, the movie. So Wonder Woman came out in 2017, directed by Patty Jenkins, and written by Alan Heinberg, and story by Zack Snyder and Jason Fuchs. So Zack Snyder works his way. So it's one way they're able to kind of tie this into the DC Snyderverse. Okay, um, so was the first superhero film directed by a woman. And partly because women are just really severely underrepresented in the Hollywood Directors Guild. There just aren't a whole lot of female directors out there, at least for movies. There's a lot more in television. But she's definitely not the last because not long after we had Captain Marvel, directed by Anna Boden, and then Birds of Prey by Kathy Yan, and then we're currently waiting for Black Widow, directed by Kate Shortland, and The Eternals by Chloe Zhao. Both of those are in that limbo. Well, we can't go see movies right now. I guess you can if you're like in Missouri or something like that, but the studios aren't releasing those yet. And so those are kind of following in Wonder Woman's footsteps. And of course, there's the next Wonder Woman movie coming out as well. So Wonder Woman's first appearance in the DC Cinematic Universe wasn't in the Wonder Woman movie. It was in Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, the Zack Snyder film. So she kind of enters in there, attempts to help the bickering Super Witcher Man and Batfleck resolve their mommy issues, and then fight the bastardized version of Doomsday. I'm always ripping on the DC movies. I apologize for that. But, Doomsday was always meant to be Kryptonian. Okay, he was like a Kryptonian monster, but he wasn't necessarily meant to be a test tube love child of General Zod and Lex Luthor, which is just gross. Those two put together, making a baby, I just don't. Well, I mean, that's why the monster's so nasty. But anyway, she's there. She helps them, fight Doomsday. And then she also appears in Justice League, teams up with Aqua, Momoa Man, and tries to prevent the movie from totally sucking. Once again, I'm ripping on the DC movies. I apologize. I really wished that Justice League was awesome. So I'm hoping that the Snyder Cut lives up to all the hype at some point. Okay, but fortunately, her standalone film, like the standalone films do in the DC universe, Man of Steel, the Batman movies, and then Aquaman, which honestly I haven't seen yet, but I've heard that it's fun. Don't ask me why I haven't seen it. I am qualified to teach this class. I just sometimes run out of time. But this is probably, in my opinion, one of the best of the DC universe for a fair number of reasons. We've already talked about the comic origin to a certain extent, but I want to talk about how the particular narrative from this story, where that comes from, which particular comics. So much of the film echoes the original origin story from Sensation Comics #1, but it adds the characters of Etta Candy, who is Wonder Woman's sidekick and comic relief, which she is in this film too. And also Dr. Poison, aka Dr. Maru, who is one of Wonder Woman's first adversaries. Both of them first appeared in Sensation Comics #2, so it takes those characters and puts them with the origin story. And then Wonder Woman also wouldn't fight Ares until Wonder Woman #1, so her first standalone comic, which was a couple years later. But she fights him again and again, so there are numerous times where she fights Ares over the years. He was her original first big villain, alongside Dr. Poison, who's like a smaller villain. And that's kind of how it works in this film. And I've got a link here, 15 times Wonder Woman fought Ares in the comics. So whereas I said before, her origin is really tied to World War II, and her origin story begins in 1941 in the comics, this one relocates it to World War, instead of World War II, which is her normal one, it relocates it to World War I. And there's no real reason for that other than maybe the fact that chemical weapons were used extensively during World War I because there weren't laws against it. So maybe that's why. And also probably because World War I is less represented in cinema. Not sure. But it's kind of interesting because it creates one particular scene which is so World War I specific that you just want to jump out of your seat and say, yes, why couldn't they ever do that? No Man's Land, whatever. So our synopsis, present-day Wonder Woman, a.k.a. Diana Prince. She looks back on how she ended up in the wider world. And after someone gives her a picture of she and Steve Trevor. So after Steve Trevor's plane crash lands on Themyscira during World War I with the Germans close behind, Diana journeys with him first to London, then to Belgium to confront the god Ares and end the war. And then while there, they cross the front lines and attempt to thwart a diabolical chemical attack planned by the Germans, General Ludendorff, and his poison master, Dr. Isabelle Moreau, who is also known as Dr. Poison. Wonder Woman 1984, the sequel, is waiting to be unleashed on us as soon as movie theaters are safe again. So someday we will be able to see all the glory that is going to be Wonder Woman 1984. Which, if the trailers are any gauge, it should be a whole lot of fun. Anyway, enjoy this film, answer the study questions, and enjoy the rest of this module.